And yes, the website, which is Natasha's doing such a great job with, the unfoundpodcast.com. Let's talk about this Friday's disappearance. We're going back to Texas again. I don't know why that is, why we've covered so many cases in Texas. And in fact, three of my assistants are in Texas, Cherie, Heather, and Emily. But we're going to be covering the disappearance of Danielle Sleeper. She disappeared from Magnolia, Texas on March 22nd, 2015. It's an episode that I'm calling Return of a Friend. And the guest will be Danielle's mother, Dinah Street. This is going to be one of those disappearances that we've run across, probably one of the most common types of disappearances that we cover on Unfound, and not just cover on Unfound, but I think that they are popular. They're plentiful just in general, where the husband just says, I don't know, I got up and she left. We've covered that before. Julie Early, Charlotte Paulus, Christy Nichols, even just maybe 5-6 weeks ago. Rosemary Rapp is the disappearance that comes to mind most prominently regarding this kind of disappearance. I don't know why. That's a disappearance that goes back to 2018, but it is your prototypical this kind of disappearance. But the story is this. Full Metal says, that's near me, Magnolia. Yeah, well, that's where we're going to be. That's where we're going Friday. Full Metal. Danielle ended up marrying a guy that she was friends with in high school. His name was Austin. And she had 2 sons from a prior marriage. And then Danielle and Austin had a son. And as you will hear Dinah tell it, this marriage started to go south. Austin was very controlling. He was accused of physically abusing Danielle's other 2 sons from the previous marriage. And in fact, there was investigation going on about this at the time of Danielle's disappearance. What happened on the evening before, on March 21st, which was a Saturday, Danielle, her husband, Austin, and their son, Hagen, went to a get-together, a party, at Danielle's friend's house. Her name is Megan. Danielle and Austin went there in separate vehicles. They were coming from different directions or something. And the party went into the early morning of March 22nd, like to 1 a.m. And Danielle and Austin started getting into a fight. Danielle wanted to stay at her friend's place. Austin wanted her to come home. And Danielle, of course, decided to go with Austin, but left her vehicle there. They left in Austin's truck. Hagen, of course, their son, went with them. Then what Austin says happened is that they went home, and he got up the next day. He says that Danielle was still there. Well, he had a prearranged meeting with some friends of his, names Charles and Spody. I think that's a nickname. At 11:30 a.m. that morning, and went there, got together with these guys. These guys verified it. And then allegedly, Austin then went home to find Danielle not there. And then allegedly right after that, well, not allegedly, but he did, right after that, he went to pick Danielle's Suburban, that was her vehicle, up at where the party was held the day before. And when he went over there, he told, what he says happened is between him meeting his buddies 11:30 and then going home is when Danielle wasn't there. But when he went to pick up Danielle's vehicle and he saw her friend Megan, he didn't say anything about her not being there. About Danielle not being at home. All he said was, well, don't worry about Danielle. She won't be coming over here anymore. And that's how the disappearance got started. So you're going to get to hear from Dinah, and you will also hear from the notes that I took from Danielle's older sister, Tana, who went over to Austin's the day after, so that would be a Monday, March 23rd, and got to talk to Austin one-on-one. And she talks about how he acted, what he said, what she saw. And that's how this disappearance stands to this day. But you're going to hear all the intricacies of this. And you're also going to hear about how Austin seems to have failing memory about some of this, and also how he tells a story where what he explains happened, the time and distance and the amount of miles he could have covered could not have happened in the amount of time that he said he did it. So once again, Danielle Sleeper, disappearance March 22nd, 2015, Magnolia, Texas. The episode is being called Return of a Friend because Austin was a friend of Danielle's who came back into her life. So there you go. This is going to be a disappearance. The interview was over 2 hours long. A lot of moving parts is what I would say in this disappearance. Even though it is your general type of guy gets up and says his wife's gone, still a lot of moving parts, a lot of names involved and locations, and still some times, and some strange things went on in the days before this disappearance happened. So that's for this Friday, and I'm sure that Natasha will make a preview video for that if anybody wants to hear that again. One more thing I do want to talk about that caught my eye before I end this live show tonight was this Iowa trucker, Clark Baldwin, who has been caught through DNA for some murders that he committed in the early 90s in Wyoming, and 2 in Wyoming and 2 in Tennessee. Actually, the one in Tennessee was a pregnant woman. She died, and her baby died as well. The reason it caught my eye is he's from Iowa. And so because I always think of Iowa, I think of Jody Husentrut. So I actually sent that article to Caroline Lowe, who is an expert on Jody's disappearance. And she got back to me and says that she's well aware of it and they're keeping an eye on it. So that gives me the idea that they will investigate Clark Baldwin, this trucker and truck driver, to see if it's possible that he was in Mason City, Iowa at the time of Jody's disappearance. I think that's very worthwhile to do. I'm also going to guess that these 4 people that he killed, I'm sure that's not the only 4 probably that he's murdered. You know, and it does bring up the question. It seems like we do have a lot of murderers who end up being truck drivers. And I'm wondering, is this something, do they become a truck driver because they know that it'll be possible for them to murder people and easier to get away with it? Or do they become a truck driver and then at some point something clicks off in their mind thinking, I feel like feel like becoming a murderer? I wonder. I have that here. Do these guys start this job because, do they become truck drivers because they want to kill people? Mostly women. It's a fascinating question. I don't know. It's like, what came first, the chicken or the egg? I don't know if there's been any studies done on that. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm certainly not a profiler, and I don't even really believe in that. But just in reading this, and we know about other truckers who ended up being truck drivers, who ended up being serial killers. Do they become serial killers on the job, or are they killers before they even jump in the truck? Just a question. Well, that's it. What did we do tonight? Talked just a little bit about what's been going on in my life, as I always do. Talked about Dr. Telesco's interview. Talked about the game show. Talked about the awesome poll for the team episode. Talked about the skull found, which is not Kelly Rothwell. The big news about this interview I'll be doing this Saturday. And once again, as soon as it's done and it's recorded and I know everything went right, I will let you in on all the details, and you'll have 6 days to look into all this yourself. Vanessa Guillen, no new news. However, I did say we are covering a missing military member on Unfound, probably within the next month. Pet peeve, disappearance articles with no information, new Twitter account, Stephanie Mayorga and Paige Escalera looking more maybe like it was a suicide. Talked about Iowa trucker, this Iowa trucker, Clark Baldwin. Answered a ton of questions tonight. Love that. And then finally, we talked about this Friday's disappearance, this Friday's episode, the disappearance of Danielle Sleeper from Magnolia, Texas on March 22nd, 2015. That's it. I hope you enjoyed it tonight. Another long live show, but I love taking questions and talking about all sorts of cool stuff. Love letting you into stuff behind the scenes. And I hope all of you will have a great rest of the week. Stay safe out there. Good night. Good night, everyone. Thanks for watching. Deeply appreciated. I want to move on to this. This is something that I'd put in my notes, but then right before I came on the air tonight, I found out that unfortunately it was not the remains of Kelly Rothwell, but my friend Lee Clifton, who was on Unfound way back at the beginning in 2016, where she was on to talk about the disappearance of Kelly Rothwell, who disappeared, I'm pointing this way, about, let me think about this. She disappeared about 4 miles that way. In fact, if I go down, I'll go right back past where she lived at the time, and I drive by where her car was left all the time as well. But there were some remains found. I'll just read what the article was. A human skull has been found along a route by the Catherine Trail and the Chemung River in Elmira, New York. Now, you may be saying, well, she disappeared in Florida. Why are you talking about New York? Well, I'm going to tell you. According to an old girlfriend, David Perry, who was Kelly Rothwell's boyfriend when she disappeared, and he is presumed to have killed her. David Perry would ride his bike up the Catherine Trail for miles. This girlfriend said he was obsessed with it. Killers often return to the scene of the crime. That's all true. That's Lee writing something at the Bring Kelly Rothwell Home or Bring Kelly Home Facebook page. We now know that the skull that was found is not Kelly Rothwell's. It is of a male, although the skull has not been identified yet. In an update that Lee wrote this evening, it is believed that they may be the remains of a prisoner who escaped police custody or who escaped the jail up there and went into the river. I don't know how many years ago this happened or anything, but that is what the belief is right at this time. Either way, whether it's a prisoner or somebody who was canoeing on the river and drowned or whatever, it's a male, not a female, so it's not Kelly Rothwell. The only reason, the very reason that I even bring it up is because the theory that Lee Clifton, that's a woman, by the way, and she writes at TampaBayCrimeReport.com. Her theory is that, and this is not a secret, her theory is that David killed Kelly, put her in a bag that you would put a surfboard in, and put her in his car and drove to New York, and that is where he disposed of her. Because he had connections to New York, he had family there. Because as soon as she was discovered missing, by the time they figured out where David was, he was in New York already. And if you haven't listened to that episode, please go back and listen to it. It's actually a two-parter. That's when I used to do that. Of course, we don't do that anymore. But you can go back and listen to the interview that I did with Lee going back very early on in Unfound's existence. I think that was October of 2016. It was like the 4th or 5th interview I did, something like that. And if you'd like to know more about Kelly's disappearance, once again, this is a disappearance that happened just down the street from where I live now. And of course, it was just south of me now, but north of where I used to live in Madeira Beach. I don't know if that's one's ever going to be solved, but here's what I know. I know that Lee Clifton, as long as she is on this earth, will not stop in trying to put David Perry away for killing Kelly Rothwell. Well, I went back to the very first case on the list, once taking me back to the beginning of 2017, over 3 years ago. And I had talked to a guy, this is not a relative in this disappearance, but a guy who has been working on this disappearance, himself and some others, together as amateurs, and he's never been on the program yet. And I looked at that disappearance and I said, well, I wonder if there's any new things going on. And just did a Google search like any of you would do. And I discovered that you have to remember something. The reason that this guy, who I like a lot, the reason he wouldn't come on the program is because at the time back in 2017, and it's a very old disappearance, 30 years old at least. And the reason he wouldn't come on the program is because the number one suspect in the disappearance was still alive. And this guy was known as being somewhat litigious. And in fact, he had sued a police department who had brought his name up in regards to this disappearance. So this guy, he was, hesitant, didn't want to get himself in trouble. I think he doesn't want to have to go to court, doesn't want to get sued. I'm not saying that he would have, but he didn't even want to put that in the realm of possibility. So he couldn't come on the program. But we still talk once in a while, but it had been a while since we really communicated. Well, in researching this disappearance, just Googling it, what did I find out? The suspect in this disappearance passed away a few months ago. I was like, well, it's bad news from a standpoint is if he did cause this disappearance, then of course he can't answer for it, and that sucks. But on the other hand, I'm thinking, well, now that he's deceased, maybe this guy will come on the program. And I still had his phone number from over 3 years ago, and I called him up, and we got to talk yesterday, or was it the day before? And we're going to be doing the interview this Saturday. And I'm really excited about it. Because of that, it's a disappearance that I've known about for a long time, even before I started Unfound. Like I said, there is a suspect, a very good suspect in this disappearance, unfortunately is now deceased. But the other big deal is that there is a decent possibility, and you will hear from this guest, that this suspect may have committed other disappearances. Of course, we could call them murders as well. So there are other women, missing women, who can be connected to this guy as well. So I'm going to be doing that interview this Saturday at 1 p.m. Eastern, and very excited about it. Because now that this guy is deceased, now his name can be really, really put out there because everybody was afraid to. I think if you really kind of look in the real nooks and crannies of the internet, you can find his name, but it's not out there like many other names of suspects and other disappearances. But this guy, he came hard at anybody who tried to connect him to the particular disappearance that we're going to be really interviewing, but we're also going to be talking about 2 other disappearances during my interview with this guest. And this guest has done fantastic work for an amateur and some other people helping him who are also amateurs. They've done fantastic work. And I can't wait for you to hear about it. I'm thinking that this will be next Friday's episode. I'm thinking. It's going to be long. I don't know if it's going to be 4 hours long, but it's going to be a long one. We have a lot to talk about. He has a lot to talk about because of the work that he's done personally. And I know that he's going to be happy about it because now he can talk about this suspect without having to look over his shoulder for any lawyers. So I'm just, it's just a shame that This guy, if he did commit this disappearance and these other disappearances, he's not going to get to answer for it here in the material world. That's a dang shame. But now that he's gone, we can talk about him. People can look into him even more without worrying about being sued or getting taken to court, which, I guess at this point, you just have to look on the good side. So it's a big development. For me personally, this is a disappearance that, like I said, I've known about it for several years, well before Unfound started. I'm talking I've maybe known about this disappearance for 20 years, maybe. Because it is unique. Once you hear it, it is a unique disappearance. I don't like to use adjectives too much, but once you hear it, I think you'll understand why. Then, in addition, to think that this guy could be connected to some other disappearances and could be a serial killer, it's certainly something. What I will tell you is you all know about it later on Saturday. I don't want to jinx it. I feel like I could talk about it and tell you what the case is and who this guy is and everything. And then something will happen and he doesn't do the interview Saturday. And then it'll be like, so I don't want to jinx it, but I promise you, after the interview happens on Saturday and it records and everything goes great, I will release to the public the disappearances that will be in the interview, and I will of course reveal who this guy is. But it's just crazy how these things work. But this is the exact reason I keep that list, because you never know what's going to happen, and I don't like forgetting about these disappearances where I've talked to people, and if I didn't keep a list like this, there would be no way for me to go back and look at it.